day, everybody. I'm going to present to you the lecture on Unit 11 today. First, I wanted to talk to you about technology projects or essays or any other thing that you may have due over the next few weeks and next semester. I want y'all to make sure that if something is going on, whether it's that night and you're trying to download it and it's not downloading, or if something has come up and you're deathly ill, something's going on, let me know and I will work around it. If you just turn in your project late, you will get points counted off for it. But I want to work with you if I can, but if I don't know what's going on, I can't help you. So today we are going to discuss Unit 11, and Unit 11 is dealing with cotton. The production of cotton, the market of cotton, the economy produced by cotton. It's all about cotton. It's a study, actually, of the antebellum South with cotton. And the antebellum South is going to be between 1830s and 1861, which is going to be the beginning of the Civil War. The South had been actively engaging in new technology and trade routes, while they were also seeking to upgrade traditional and cultural ingrained practices such as slavery and agricultural production within the modernized world. Beginning in the late 1830s, merchants from the Northeast, Europe, Mexico, and Canada, and the Caribbean started coming in flocks to southern cities. They were setting up firms, warehouses, ports, markets, and as a result, these cities were going to double and sometimes even triple in size, such as Richmond, Charleston, St. Louis, Mobile, Savannah, New Orleans. And also with size increase, they had more global importance. Populations became more cosmopolitan, they became more educated. You started to see system of classes. Before you had poor and rich, and now you are seeing a middle class develop. You're seeing lower, middle, and upper class communities. Ports had, before then, had just focused primarily on the importation of slaves, and they only shipped regionally or locally. And now they were seeing daily and weekly lines to New York City, to Manchester, to Liverpool, to Lisbon. The world was slowly becoming global, where we were no longer in isolation from other countries. In November of 1785, a Liverpool farm imported the first 7 bales of American cotton into Europe. It was an unscheduled delivery. It was an unwanted delivery because European merchants saw cotton as a product of the Caribbean islands such as Barbados, Haiti, Martinique, Jamaica, Cuba, and so up until that time they didn't see it as a North American product. By the early 1800s, the American South had developed a market in Europe for luxurious, long, staple cotton, and it was grown exclusively on the Sea Islands off of Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. In 1820, a discovery was made in Rodney, Mississippi, and there they discovered a type of cotton called Petite Gulf, which slid through the cotton gin extremely easily. And the cotton gin, of course, was a machine invented by Eli Whitney in 1794, and it deseeded the cotton. And with the discovery of this cotton, cotton essentially was the creator of the antebellum South. It's what made the South what it was. In 1830, there was an act called the Indian Removal Act, and what they did is they removed Native people from their lands in the Southwest, and you're looking at Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, northern Louisiana, and they were all moved to reservations. So all of a sudden there was all this land that was up for sale, and farmers could buy it for pennies on the dollar, and it contributed to the rise of American cotton production, which would overcome the first staple crop of the South, which was tobacco. Now, tobacco was considered a rough crop. It treated the land poorly. It drained the soil nutrients. You constantly had to move and switch lands trying to find fertile fields. Once tobacco had been grown on a field, you could only usually grow 4 to 5 crops of it on land before you would have to move on to the next land. Basically, the land at that point was only good for growing grass. It would drain the soil and all the nutrients out. So tobacco was extremely expensive to produce because of the tremendous use of slaves, the massive temporary fields, and then the constant movement by farmers to find suitable land to grow the product. And the rise of cotton correlated with an increase in slavery in the South. The Cotton Kingdom, as it was called, and the Slave South moved hand in hand. Both became extremely vital to the economy of the South. Now, slavery had existed since 1619 when a group of Dutch settlers arrived in Jamestown with 20 African slaves. And by 1790, and this was just 2 years after the ratification of the Constitution, 654,000 slaves lived in the South. Just 20 years later, in 1810, there was 1.1 million slaves held in bondage in the South. Cotton and slaves went hand in hand in the antebellum South because the more slaves a person owned, the more cotton they could harvest, the more money they would bring in. It all ties back into money, and that's what drove the economy during this time. Okay, according to the textbook, the most tragic, horrifying aspect of slavery was its inhumanity. Slaves were beaten on a daily basis. The amount of pain from lashes or whippings would be almost unbearable. Slaves worked in all conditions. The heat of the sun was extremely excruciating in the South in the summer. There was a lot of heartbreak and loss. Death was common. Children were taken from their parents consistently, and it didn't matter to the slave owners. They would just sell them. Families were being sold and torn apart and split, and it was very common in that day. Women were treated even worse. If they had children that belonged to their slave owner that was his child, they were still considered slaves. That child was still considered a slave. Women had no rights. Whatever their master said, they had to do. It didn't matter what he said. Focus on the religious. Now we're going to focus on the religious community and Christianity. Most Southern churches or denominations were vocal defenders of slavery, and the ministers defended this. And they got around it by saying that slavery was okay because God had selected Africans for bondage, and that the evangelicalism of slaves was to be the greatest calling. So they were justifying taking slaves and having slaves because the African religion was not okay with God. So he was allowing the African slaves to come over to the New World, and so they could be Christianized. That was their justification. That was their okay, and the reason that they preached that slavery was okay. You will also see in this unit leaders emerge, such as Nate Turner. He was a leader of this. It was the deadliest rebellion in the antebellum South. He was this great leader who he claimed to be visited by spirits and considered himself to be a prophet. Some people considered him crazy. Some people saw him as a prophet. After the rebellion, the Great Rebellion, he was found after he had been hiding out for a few weeks, and he was executed. Now, one of the most important cultural aspects of identity formation that connected slaves to their own past was marriage. Now, what marriage did was it created families, and the concept of a family was more than anything to a slave. It played a crucial role in their daily life. Family and kinship networks represented an institution which slaves could piece together a sense of community, a sense of feeling, a sense of dedication, It was separate from their daily lives. It was a separate institution. They didn't have to think about the slavery or what was going on there. They were brought back to their roots. They were able to have communal traditions to maintain religious beliefs that they had believed from their country, that they had previously been kidnapped from. They would pass down from generation to generation ancient ancestral traditions. It didn't necessarily have to be religious, but that kept their culture, that kept their identity alive. It kept the people who had gone on before them alive. So you have generations of slaves who now no longer were familiar with Africa or any of the traditions from which their ancestors came from, because they were now on this land and they were several generations apart from it. But they still kept that sense of identity. They still kept the sense of their ancestors. They still kept a sense of community, and that was one of the most important things to a slave, was to become married and start a family and do the same traditions where they held their cultural beliefs and could keep them alive even after they were gone. Now we're going to switch over to women. The women's or a woman's role in antebellum South, and a woman's role was pretty much the same as it had been. They were to foster values for economic success and cultural refinement. They were calming and they were moralizing creatures. They were to create a calm influence. They were to create a sense of peace and serenity, and everything was good. They were to practice sexual purity. They managed households. Families were clean. Children were fed. Children were well behaved in the household, and women were bound to the house. They were not to have an outside social life or work or anything like that. They were to maintain the family, and that was it in the household. Now, for the last thing I want to talk about, we're going to switch gears. And when you look at the antebellum South, we're going to look at it in regards to education, industry, and to cities. Now, education was only reserved for those who had money, and those children were educated at home. Now, industry in the South, there really wasn't any industry. The South reinvested its money back into slaves and land. So instead of branching out and having something else to fall back on, everything that they had, everything thrown, the entire economy was based upon slaves and land and the commodity that they could get out, which had become cotton. And cities were they were small. They were not like the North. They were not huge, but they were usually the people who had money. The wealthy lived in the city. The poor could not afford it. So, and there was not really much development in cities unless it was specifically for the cotton trade. So that is Unit 11 for the week. I wish you all the best of luck on the quiz, and I will be coming up fairly soon to see everyone. Hope you all have a good rest of your day.